Donc, on a le plaisir d'accueillir Sara Séguin, qui est professeure du département d'informatique et de mathématiques de l'Université du Québec à Chicoutimi. And she will present a mathematical modeling for short-term hydropower optimization, new formulation, and a predictive approach. So, without further ado, Sara, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. So, hello, everyone. Sorry for this technological problem. It still happened. So thank you, Olivier, also for the invitation and for the presentation. So today I will be talking about mathematical modeling for short-term hydropower optimization. So I will present some new formulations that we have been working on and also older ones. So I'm very active in the field of hydropower optimization. So I'm just giving you a brief overview of what we have been working on in the past few years. So first of all, I will introduce the context of hydropower in Canada, Quebec, hydropower scheduling, the markets. So people that are less familiar with the field understand the context of the optimization. Then I will present two different formulations. So one for the regulated market, one for the deregulated market. And I will present very quickly an attempt that we have done with prediction in order to predict the water discharges at the power plants. And then I will conclude. So before I start the presentation, of course, all of the work that we are doing is always done in collaboration with many students and colleagues. So for these hydropower projects, I work a lot with some people at the NTNU in Norway, hydropower producers also. I'm still working with also Miguel Anjos in hydropower with some students, Rio Tinto still, and new colleagues from the Royal Military College of Canada. And of course, take the time to thank the funding agencies for these projects. And as for the students, also we founded this lab at the Université de Québec of Chicoutimi in June 2024 with one of my colleagues, Hugo Tremblay. So we have a few students working with us at the moment, and most of them are working in hydropower optimization. So I just wanted to take the time to present them and thank them also for some slides that they helped out for the presentation. So the LabMGO is the Laboratory for Research and Modeling Graphs and Optimization. So here are a few students. So hydropower optimization. So I've been active in this field for a few years already. So in Canada, 61.7% of the energy is produced by hydropower production. And in Quebec, we are talking about 99%. We're the third biggest producer in the world of hydropower. We have a total of 82 gigawatts of installed capacity, and hydropower, once installed, is, of course, a clean and renewable energy. So this map simply shows for all of the provinces the amount of energy production from hydropower. So we can see that in Quebec, okay, so there's a 94% of production. Here I have 99 on the right. So depends on the date of this map that was from 2021. So just to show you that in all provinces, there's a lot of hydropower production, and especially, of course, in Quebec, where all of the power mostly comes from hydropower. So in Quebec, there's no energy market. So this is going to be important for the talk from a producer point of view. So of course, Hydro-Québec are on the market. This part will be interesting in the next few days, approaching February 1st. So I will not go in details. But from a producer point of view, in the province of Quebec, there's no market. So if you're an independent producer, you have to buy and sell at fixed price from Hydro-Québec. Of course, they are on the markets with the other provinces and with the US. And prices are also fixed for the consumers in the province. So this helps a bit in the mathematical formulation. So everyone knows Hydro-Québec is a public utility, and they manage all of the production, transmission, and distribution of the energy. I work a lot with Rio Tinto in the past years, so they are an independent producer for their own hydropower plant. And in this case, they have to buy and sell at fixed price with Hydro-Québec. So when I'm developing models, for example, with Rio Tinto, we don't have to consider the prices of energy. So just quickly glance at what is the system in Quebec. So Hydro-Québec owns 61 hydropower plants, 24 thermal plants. 44% of Canada's capacity is produced here. And the system is composed of 28 reservoirs, and there's a total of 34,000 kilometers of distribution lines. So simply to show a picture of the province. And as I just mentioned, there are other producers, independent producers from Hydro-Québec. So I've been working with Rio Tinto for around 10 years, developing some models. And am I working with them? So in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region, they produce aluminum. So they have 4 aluminum smelters. And this is a very energy-consuming process. And they own and operate their own private hydropower plants. And they have a total of 6 power plants in the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean region to feed their own aluminum smelters. So when we're talking about hydropower scheduling, so what we're trying to do is determine which turbines to turn on and off, what are their volume, the water volumes, what are the reservoirs, and so forth. And the scheduling is very complex. So hydropower production functions, I will get back to that later. They are nonlinear, they are non-convex. We have to consider uncertainty in the inflows and in the prices. I will also get back to that later. If we are determining which turbines to use, this induces integer variables in the problems. So it complicates the problem given that they are now nonlinear integer. We have to take decisions many times a day in order to operate the power plants effectively. There are many turbines, many power plants in a complete hydropower system, and each turbine has a different efficiency. So for the same operating conditions, they will produce a different power output. So we also want to consider this in the models when it is possible. So since we have nonlinear mixed integer turbines, many time steps, usually in the literature, when we're talking about hydropower optimization, there are 3 big levels of optimization. So on the long-term planning, we use these. For example, if we know that a turbine will be out for a few years because there's going to be maintenance, then long-term models will account for long periods of, for example, 5 years of planning horizon. When we're talking operational point of view, we have the short-term and the mid-term models. When we're talking mid-term, it's really looking at the reservoir volumes. For example, taking a decision every week for the next year. And when we are talking about short-term models, then we're defining the actual optimal strategy for the daily production. So we're determining which turbines to use every hour or every day for an horizon of maybe a week to maximum a few weeks. So these time horizons are divided between long, medium, and short-term optimization problems. So in this talk, I will talk only about short-term hydropower optimization models. So this is something I've been working on for the past years. So what are these models used for? So on an operational level, we want to determine what are the reservoir volumes, what is the amount of water that's processed by each of the turbines, what is the amount of water spilled also at the power plant, I will get back to that, and the exact turbines in operation, and that is for each time step and for each hydropower plant in the system. So my definition for short-term hydropower is really determining water, volumes, and either number of turbines in operations, I will get back to that later, or the actual turbines in operation. So I talked quickly about the markets in the beginning of the talk. So as I mentioned, when we're in a regulated market setting, such as Quebec with Hydro-Québec, from a producer point of view, so yes, Hydro-Québec does transactions, but from a hydropower producer point of view, in a regulated market, we will usually try to aim at maximizing the energy production. So we have a hydropower system, we have water available, and we want to make the most out of each droplet of water in this system. When we're talking about a deregulated market, so I will be talking specifically about the Norwegian day-ahead market because I'm working with producers over there. So the hydropower producers have to bid on the market. They bid volumes and prices that they want to buy or sell for the next 24 hours. And then we have the transmission system operator that takes all of these bids in from all of the producers and then clears the market clears the bids based on all the bids for everyone and tells them, every producer, what is the amount they have to buy and sell and at what price. And usually they try to, well, not usually, but they maximize the social welfare when they're clearing the bids. And when we're talking about a deregulated market, since we're considering prices and inflows, then the objective functions will usually involve either minimizing costs or maximizing profits, compared to regulated markets, where then we will really want to maximize energy production. So these two different market settings will lead to different formulations. So in the regulated setting, from the producer point of view, we don't consider the uncertainty due to prices. So we can have more precise mathematical formulations because then we have only one type of uncertainty. And when we're talking about a deregulated market setting, then we have to consider the uncertainty of inflows and of prices also. So it's a bit more difficult sometimes to have a very precise formulation. Okay. So before we can do any optimization, we have to understand how is energy produced in order to actually have something, if we're talking about a maximization of energy production or cost or profit, we have to know how much power are we producing at a certain time given the different variables and parameters. So this is a side cut of a hydropower plant. So here we have the forebay elevation, sorry. So this is the height of the reservoir before the power plant. This is the tail race elevation, so the river after the power plant. And the water, here I'm talking about a reservoir power plant because we can have also the run-of-river plants, which are only, they don't have these reservoirs, and so only the speed of the water will account for the power production. When we're talking about a reservoir power plant, so the water goes from the forebay elevation through the penstock, and then it goes to the river after the power plant, and it makes the turbine turn here, and then we can determine what is the production. And of course, we have to account for the energy losses in the penstock from the speed of the water, the friction on the tunnel. So this is what we see here. So when we're talking about mathematical formulation of the energy production at a power plant, well, we have the gross head, which is the difference between the forebay elevation and the tail race elevation. Now, our tail race elevation depends on the total water discharge, because the more water we process, the higher the tail race gets. So it will have an effect on the tail race elevation. And when we're doing the calculations mathematically, we have to consider the energy losses in the penstock. So we have to actually consider the net head, which is the forebay elevation minus the tail race elevation minus the losses due to the water discharge in the penstock. And so the energy production depends on the net water head and the total discharge at the power plant. And so it depends on the total water discharge, the unit water discharge, and the actual net head at the power plant. So this leads to a highly nonlinear, non-convex function. And also we have to consider that each turbine has a different efficiency. So if we're talking about a power plant with, say, 3 turbines, and we all give them the same amount of water and the same net water head, well, the power they will produce will actually differ for each of them. So if we want a precise mathematical formulation, we have to consider that each turbine has a different efficiency. And yeah, so this is what, so energy production, nonlinear function, depends on the net water head, total water discharge. In the models that I will be presenting, net waterhead, usually we have a curve that we can translate net waterhead into volume. So it's easier to work with the volumes in the formulation. So if I'm talking later about volume, so power is either volume and total water discharge or net waterhead and total water discharge, but we have the relationship between both. So I was talking about uncertainty in the inflows. So where does this come from? So the hydropower plants are they're located on the watershed. So this means that in the area where this power plant is and the watershed it is located on, every droplet of water that will be on this watershed will eventually become available to the power plant. So I'm not going into more details because I use the information from the hydrologist for the scenarios of the inflows and all that. But I wanted to explain where does this uncertainty on the inflows come. So yes, of course, they come from precipitations of rain. They come from the snow melt also in the spring, but it also comes from the moisture in the soil. It also comes from percolation and so forth. So there are many hydrological aspects to consider. And I'm a user of the uncertainty and the inflows. So usually I will receive some possible scenarios for inflows. So I'm not calculating these inflows directly, but power plants are located on watersheds, and all of the water available on this watershed will eventually be available in the system. So these are very important when we're talking about hydropower optimization. The water balance constraints are very important. So if we look at the simple definition, well, the water that we have in our reservoir at T+1 is going to be equal to the water we have in our reservoir at period T, minus the water that we are discharging, so that we're sending to the turbines, minus the water that we're spilling. So I forgot to talk about spilling. So it's simply water that we're going to release at the reservoir, and that is not going to be processed by the turbine. So of course we want to avoid this, because if we're dropping water, we can never use it again to produce. But in periods when there's snow melt, of course we have to spill water to empty the reservoirs to be able to catch the water from the snow melt. So when we're talking about spillage, it's simply water that's not processed by the turbine, plus the uncertainty in the inflow. So here it's deterministic formulation, but just to say that minimally, when we're talking about short-term hydropower optimization, if we want to maximize energy, we have at least to have these water balance constraints to make sure that we're using the actual water available in the system. So water balance constraints, very important, the minimal constraints to have in our system. So today I wanted to present two mathematical formulations for the short-term hydropower optimization in a deregulated market setting. And after I will present another formulation in the regulated market setting. And finally, as I explained in the beginning, I will present an attempt with prediction that we have done for the short-term hydropower model. So today I will be mostly presenting the mathematical formulation ideas, not presenting the numerical results and all that. They are available in the papers, but I wanted to take the time to really go into the formulations themselves. Okay, so this first one, so here it was a part of one of my PhD students' thesis. So this is her first paper, but she published more based on this formulation. So if you're interested, the paper is here. And again, so not again, but this project, we are working on the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean hydropower system. So in the system, there is a total of 6 power plants, but for the purpose of the project, because we want to test and we don't want to have too long of calculation time, we're working specifically on 2 of these power plants. So Chicoutimi and Sara. So we're working with real data from these hydropower systems. So when we want to do the short-term, when we want to obtain a solution to the short-term model, as a producer, we want to know what is the water discharge at each plant, what is the reservoir volume or net water head, depending on how you're formulating, what are the states of the turbine for a given planning horizon. So for this project, we wanted to maximize the produced energy because we're working in a regulated market setting. We also added the constraint of imposing max 2 startups per 10 days. So I also forgot to talk about startups. If we're doing an optimization model, we don't want the turbines to be started and stopped at every period either, because then it causes premature wear on the equipment, and the operators of these power plants won't enjoy also turning on and off the turbines every hour or every day. So in this case, we looked at the historical data to see, okay, in a 10-day period, how many startups are there usually? So realistically, we want to have solutions that are directly usable in practice. So we don't want to disrupt too much what is going on actually in practice. So we looked at the data and we stated that 2 startups per 10 days seemed something that was usually done in practice. And we also wanted a model that had quick calculation times, and we have to consider multiple inflow scenarios. So in this case, we're not considering prices, simply the inflow scenarios. So the main question when we're doing short-term hydropower optimization is how do we model the hydropower production function? So if we have a big system, we could say, okay, let's have one power production function for the power plant. But in this case, we have a short-term model, and we really want to have a precise formulation. So in this case, we said, well, why not use directly the efficiency points of the hydropower production function? So as I mentioned, every turbine has a different efficiency. And for different, of course, this is for one volume. This is for one value of volume. So for a given volume and for a given water discharge, we have the maximum efficiency for either 3 turbines in operation, 4 turbines in operation, or 5 turbines in operation. So in this case, we have 5 turbines in our hydropower plant. We have to minimally operate the plant with 3 turbines for operational restrictions. So when we're solving this model, then we want to determine what is the water discharge, what is the volume, and how many turbines is there in operation. So yes, we have 10 possible combinations for 3 turbines in the system, but we decided for the first part of this model to really determine how many turbines are in operation. And if we're using the efficiency point, then we know which turbines are in operation for this efficiency point, because this is data that we have access to. So here you have the water discharge and the efficiency. So for 3 turbines, for a given volume, we have the maximum efficiency point for 3 turbines, and we know the water discharge and also the turbines associated to this point. We have 1 efficiency point for 4 turbines in operation, so the maximum efficiency, 1 for 5, and we have the maximum water that we can discharge to the turbine. After that, we have to spill the water. So we don't want to go over the Qmax. So we said, well, now, so this becomes a linear problem because now we have the water discharge and the volume, and we know exactly which turbines are in operation, and we have the actual power production for this efficiency point. So in this case, we're taking the maximum volume. I will get back to that later. How are we considering other volumes? So we said, let's look at the efficiency points for the maximum volume of the reservoir, because we have to start with some information. And later in the model, we will penalize the production function with regards to where we are in the volume we calculated versus what is the maximum volume of the reservoir. So let's say for maximum volume, we have 3 efficiency points in this case. So what we're saying is, well, let's try to only choose one of these points, simply. So we want to maximize energy production. We know what are these points. So we have water discharge and power. And we have to choose only one at every period for every power plant. So then we have a linear integer problem. But doing this, of course, if we only propose 3 points to the optimization solver, then probably it will be infeasible because we don't have enough points to choose from. So we said we had to add some points in this case. So we went with +5, -5, +10, -10 to add some points close to the efficiency point. Why did we choose 5 and 10? Because these are the actual operational values. So if you change something in the turbine, it will go by steps of 5 actually in practice for the water discharge. So we can discharge 2.73 cubic meters per second in a real turbine. So we went with 5 and 10 steps. So this adds some points around the efficiency point for 3 turbines, 4 turbines, 5 turbines. And we also added some points between the maximum and the 5 turbines in operation. So what we end up with is that we have pairs of maximum efficiency points at full reservoir for a water discharge. And we have, of course, the power associated with this because we have the data. So we have a model that we are maximizing the energy production. And we have to choose 1 point for each power plant for every time step. So linear integer problem, so it is quick to solve. So as I mentioned, these were the efficiency points at full reservoirs. But when we're solving the optimization model, of course, the volume will not be the full reservoirs. So we will penalize the computed volume versus the full reservoir with a penalty that we received from the company telling us, use this value of megawatt hours for your penalties. We penalize the unit startups. In this case, we wanted to impose a maximum of 2. The constraints are the water balance constraints, very important, as I mentioned, choosing 1 efficiency point for every power plant, every time step, and maximum number of startups. So there's also a penalty in the objective function. So here it was just, it's a bit blurry. Just to show you that, so we have the maximize the energy production in stage 0, future energy production. I didn't talk about scenarios and uncertainty, but in this case, we're using uncertainty in the inflows. And so we're solving a stochastic model with scenario trees. But here it was just to show you that we have a penalty for the full reservoir maximum minus the computed volume times the actual parameter that we have for the penalty versus full reservoir. So this is how we account for the energy loss from full reservoir. So in this case, objective function maximizing the energy. I'm not going through this, but the only constraints we have in the model is water balance constraint. So the ones that I showed before, the volumes, the water discharges, water spills, and the inflows. Choosing only 1 combination of turbines, minimum, respecting the maximum number of startups, and bounds on volumes and water discharges. So this model, by using the efficiency points here, as I mentioned, instead of having a nonlinear mixed integer problem, by solving it with the efficiency point, then we have a linear integer problem, which is a lot easier to solve in practice and allows also to have a more directly usable value in practice, because in the power plants, they're already using usually the best efficiencies of the turbines to implement a decision. So by optimizing directly with the efficiency point, then we have the best turbines that we can have for these values of water discharge and of volume. So here, maximum efficiency points was very quick to obtain also the result. So I'm not going into more details for this formulation on the on the actual numerical results and all that. So we tested this with different scenario generation methods and everything is available in the papers if you're interested. I really want to talk about the formulation today. So this is a formulation that leads to a linear integer problem. Now this combination, the second formulation, combination of turbines, I'm talking about it in details because it is used later in the deregulated market setting. So this is actually part of my thesis. It's already been a few years, but we're still using this formulation in some new projects. So I wanted to take time to explain also this formulation. So recall, power, as I just mentioned, nonlinear function of volume and water discharge, turbine efficiency, forbidden zone of operations, turbine startup. Oops, sorry. So we talked about this for the other formulation. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we want to know exactly which turbines are in operation also. So using single turbines in the model, this induces integer variables, and then different number of turbines will change the net water head. Everything is nonlinear, non-convex. So how do you account for that easily? So in this project, we said, well, why don't we work with the number of active turbines and develop a two-phase model? So the first phase will actually choose, well, not choose, but compute water discharge volume and number of active turbines. And then the second phase will simply be to actually determine which combination to use. So we split the model in two. So when we're talking about combinations of turbines, so as the same example as before, because it's the same system for 3, 4, or 5 turbines, so there are 10 possible combinations of 3, 5 possible combinations of 4, and 1 possible combination of 5. So what we did is, well, we conducted a pre-processing to actually build surfaces of hydropower production functions using a dynamic programming algorithm. So we said, let's build these surfaces, optimize them to determine how many turbines have to be in operation, and then select the actual combinations of turbines to use. So we did a dynamic programming algorithm of the maximum, and we used the maximum power output in the optimization model. So just to show you, we created one surface for every number of active turbines. So for example, if we have here 3 active turbines, so for every discretization of volume, for every discretization of water discharge, we calculated a dynamic programming algorithm for the 10 possible combinations of 3 turbines, and then we took the maximum. And this is the point that you see on this figure. Then for the other discretization, we ran again 10 times the dynamic programming algorithm, took the maximum to build these surfaces. So for every one of these data points on the surfaces, we ran the dynamic programming algorithm 10 times, 5 times, because there are 5 possible combinations, and 1 time here. And these give us our hydropower production functions that then we can optimize in the objective function of the optimization model. So yes, there's a lot of pre-processing time here, the first time that you do it. But once you obtain your actual hydropower production function, then you're simply solving your optimization model based on these. So we have surfaces. Now, of course, if we want to use these surfaces in an objective function, we have to approximate them. There are many ways to do it. So we have approximated these using polynomial approximations in some papers. Other papers we have used splines. So there are many ways to approximate these surfaces afterwards to be able to use them in an objective function. So in these surfaces, we have water discharge, volume, and number of turbines. But how can we penalize the unit restart, the unit startups? So we separated the problem in two, the loading problem and the unit commitment. So the first phase gives us optimal number of turbines, so either 3, 4, or 5, water discharge, and the volume. Then we give this as an input to the second phase, which it is the unit commitment, and we determine exactly the combination of active turbines. So we give to the model volume, water discharge, number of active turbines. Let's say it was 3. And then in this model, well, we have 10 possible combinations of 3 active turbines. So we will have 1 integer variable for each of these combinations, and we will ask the model to choose only 1. So by decomposing this in 2 phases, yes, of course, in the loading problem, maybe we're doing a small over approximation, but it still allows us to determine quickly the optimal number of active turbines, and then determine the exact combination for the active turbines. So quickly, so the variables are, as I just mentioned, water discharge, reservoir volume, number of active turbines. We want to maximize the energy. So here we can see that these are our surfaces that I just presented at the slide before. So what is the power produced for a given volume and water discharge? And we have our water balance constraints, bounds on our variable, minimum, maximum water volume, and maximum water discharge. And we want to choose 1 number of active turbines per period. So what we can see here is that we have a nonlinear integer problem because we have integer variables for the choice of the number of active turbines. But in this case, I'm not going to do all of the proof, but in this case, since the matrix of the coefficients of the constraints, because our constraints are simply water balance, bounds, and choosing 1 variable, so this matrix is totally unimodular. So solving, dropping the integer variable and solving a continuous nonlinear problem is sufficient to obtain an integer solution. So this was the small hack here. So with this problem, we're solving a nonlinear continuous problem, and we're still obtaining an integer solution on the choice of the active number of turbines. So computational time is very low because now we have nonlinear continuous problem. IPOpt, for example, is very quick in solving these problems. So relaxation is sufficient to obtain an integer solution. So this was one of the main advantages of this method. And then in the second phase, as I mentioned, we give as input, we already have the water discharge, the volume, and the number of active turbines. And then we simply choose the exact combination, and we penalize the startups also in between every time step. And so this model is also very quick to solve because it's a simple, very simple linear integer problem. So this was the main advantage of this this method. So the relaxation of the first model, which allows to still have an integer solution. But there are drawbacks with this method. I will go back to it right after when I'm talking about the deregulated markets. Okay, so I talked about this combination of turbines in details because I want to go into the deregulated formulation. So this project is still ongoing. So it's going to be available soon. We submitted for a presentation, but the paper will be published in the next month, I would say. So this is in collaboration with NTNU and ADEO, which is a hydropower producer in Norway. So we have actual access to real data for a real hydropower system over there. And this is also part of Mohammad's thesis. So here I'm talking about the Nord Pool day-ahead market. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so the hydropower producers submit their bids for the next 24 hours. So they have to give, here are my bids for the next 24 hours, here are my volumes, here are my prices. And then operator will clear the bids based on everyone's bidding. And Nord Pool accept many types of bids. So the ones we mostly see in the literature are the hourly bids. So you're simply giving hourly bids are simply curves of volumes to buy or sell for each hour, dependent or independent of the price. So you can send them a bid saying, okay, I want this volume with this price at this hour. Or you can say, well, if the price is between a lower bound and an upper bound, here would be my volume. So this is the producer that decides if they want to send dependent or independent prices. There are also block bids that are accepted. So what is a block bid? So for a regular block bid, it's a block. So you say from 8 a.m. to 12, here is the volume and here is the price. So in a block. We can have linked block bids. So we have many regular blocks that are linked. Profiled block bids, the difference with the regular ones, and these are the ones of interest for this talk, is that we can submit profiled block bids, so we can have different volumes and prices in the same block bid, so profiled block bids, and also curtable. They also have bids in exclusive groups. So when we're talking about exclusive groups, is to say that an exclusive group, is a collection of block bids, and only one of the blocks will be actually selected. And we have also flexi orders. I'm not going into detail. But here I put, if you're interested in having more information on these different types of bids. But what I wanted to highlight here, in the literature, mostly we're talking about hourly bids. And for this project, we are interested in looking at the block bid. So we're using exclusive groups for profile block bids. So what we have to do is to submit profile block bids, so volumes and prices for the next 24 hours. So few papers have addressed the subject of profile block bids and exclusive groups in the context of short-term hydropower optimization. And what we are interested in is looking at, well, is there an interest in using block bids versus hourly bids? Because most of the papers are using hourly bids. So we want to compare results from the block bids with the results with the hourly bids to see where is exactly the advantage in these methods in using this type of bids, if any. And we want also to, well, maybe we will also compare with SHOP. So SHOP is a widely used optimization tool for the hydropower producers in Norway. So it's developed by Syntet. And in this case, it's a successive linear approximation. So if we're comparing the results with SHOP, then we really want to use the nonlinear formulation. SHOP is using a linear formulation. We want to compare the regular blocks and also the block bids. So the hourly bids versus the block bids. And in this case, as I just mentioned, we want to use the two-phase combination of turbines that I just presented to really have a precise mathematical formulation for the hydropower production function. So we're looking at mathematical formulation and the exclusive groups or the profile block biddings that are not studied that much in the literature. So when we're talking about a profile block order, so when we're submitting bids to the market operator, we have to determine what are the volume and prices for a certain number of consecutive hours. In Norway, a block has to be minimum 3 hours. So you can have as many as you want, but they have to be 3 hours minimum. And a block is either buy or sell. You cannot, in the same block order, have buying and selling. And when we're talking about exclusive groups, then it's a cluster of profile block bids. You can have maximum 15 block bids in this cluster. And you can only activate one of the block bids per exclusive group. And there's a maximum number of exclusive groups that you can bid. If I recall, it is 3. So why are profile block bids interesting compared to hourly block bids? So this is something that we have to validate with our upcoming results. But these types of bids could be interesting for hydropower systems that have limited or no flexibility. So by submitting profile block bids, then you know for a certain number of hours that your production will be stable. So if you have very limited or no flexibility, this can be an advantage. Hydropower systems that have very high startup and shutdown costs could also benefit from block bids, because then you can submit a block that is, for example, 8-hour long, and you know that you will have no startup or shutdown in this period. Markets with volatile electricity prices, then you can fix your production also for a few hours. And of course, for long-term strategic planning, again with profile block bids, because you're submitting blocks of hours. So for the project, so SHOP, they use successive linear programming, and they use mostly hourly bids most of the time. We're interested in seeing, okay, let's use the nonlinear combination of turbines that I presented and use the profile block bid. So in this case, we have to consider uncertainty for prices and inflow. And what we're doing is that we're using the first phase model that I presented, so that we're trying to maximize the energy production. We have water balance constraints, and we're choosing one number of active turbines. And so we're using the first phase model to actually generate these profile block bids. So we're simply generating block bids with certain number of hours, with volume, with prices that help in maximizing the energy production. And in the second phase of the problem, well, we will solve this phase using different possible scenarios for prices and for inflows, but we will actually select 15 blocks. So first phase, we use a combination of turbines to maybe generate 500 or 1,000 profile block bids. And then we use all of these block bids as input to the second phase, where we only select 15 because the market only allows us to select 15 blocks per exclusive group. So we're using the nonlinear formulation and then for generating the profile block bid. And then in the second phase, we're actually selecting these 15 blocks. So I'm not going to go into details with the formulation. The mathematical formulation is here, but we want to maximize the revenue. So power production in the day ahead market price, lost opportunity cost. I'm not going into more details, but startup cost. So basically, we're maximizing profit here. And in our second phase, we're creating the exclusive groups. So we want to select maximum 15 blocks per group. And so depending if we're submitting 1, 2, or 3 exclusive groups, we will solve this problem 1, 2, or 3 times to have 3 exclusive groups to then submit to the market and obtain the clearing afterward. So, So, an example of profile block bids. So here we have the next 24 hours, and what we have is the actual production. And I didn't write it here, but for each of the profile, we also have the prices associated with these production values. So the first phase model actually gives us a production plan for the next 24 hours that is maximizing the revenue. And then we can generate thousands of these profiles because we have a continuous nonlinear problem based on the combination of turbines formulation that I showed just before. So this is an interesting project because we're really trying to have a more precise mathematical formulation and really use the nonlinear hydropower production function curves. And we're also trying to use the block bidding to see if there's really an advantage in using block bids versus hourly bids. And what? Oh yeah, so still ongoing. So we will compare with those of SHOP and also to determine if there's an added value. And as I just mentioned, we can generate thousands of profile block bids very easily. And then our second phase is to only choose 15. And as I mentioned, without saying it, the main drawback of this nice, totally unimodular hack is that if we add one constraint, then we break this condition, and then we have a nonlinear integer problem again. So it works well if you don't have other constraints such as environmental constraints or other constraints on your system or even minimum production. So so this is an interesting point. So as soon as we add a constraint, it breaks this nice condition. But for the time being, we will still test it on with this nice unimodular condition, and then see how can we add constraints without maybe breaking the condition. And so I guess 5 minutes, Olivier?
Yeah,
5:10. Okay, so I think I have time. Anyway, this is very fast what I wanted to show with prediction. So prediction. So I'm not from the prediction also field, but everyone is doing machine learning. So why not try an hydropower optimization? But okay, so this question was a question I had, as I just mentioned. Everyone is saying machine learning is doing great things. So could we try to use prediction to solve the short-term hydropower optimization problem? So this is part of Johan Villeneuve's thesis. It's also ongoing work. The paper will be out real soon. So hydropower producers have large amounts of data. For example, with Rio Tinto, for the last 60 years, they have data every 2 minutes. So this gives us on all the system. So this gives us a lot of data to work with. So looking at all this data, could we try to maybe predict the operations of the power plant? So I was really curious okay, mathematical optimization, it does work well. We are developing still new formulations, but I was just curious. And if we're doing really a straightforward prediction, what will happen? What will be the result? So for this project, we said, okay, let's try to describe the short-term hydropower problem in terms of machine learning in a predictive setting. So we want to predict the next 96 hours of water usage for each plant. And we want to compare the results with a mixed integer linear programming model, more specifically the efficiency points method that I presented in the first part of the talk, because we have a lot of results on this formulation, and it was tested and validated also. So we use the long short-term memory recurrent neural network to formulate the problem. Today, I'm not going into the details of this formulation. I wanted very quickly to talk about this prediction without too many details. So we chose the LSTM because it's effective at capturing the long-term dependencies, and it also adapts to short-term changes in the input data. And when we're talking about hydropower optimization, the inflows are updated every day or twice a day. So we have to always re-optimize based on this data. So it's effective also in changes in the input data. So one of the difficulties first. So again, we're working on these two power plants, Chicoutimi. So they're on the same river. There are time dependencies between both. The output of one affects the next one. And how can we model this in prediction? So we want to predict the operation, but then the operations upstream have an impact downstream. So how can we model this spatial temporal dependency? So first of all, he decided to solve the problem independently. So first solve Chicoutimi, and then use the inflows and the changes in the data, give this to Chicoutimi, and then predict Chicoutimi as well. So maybe not the best methodology, but it was very difficult to try and model everything in the same predictive model. So that's why it was divided into the two power plants, and the decision of the first one actually affects the second one afterward. And I'm not talking more about this prediction, but I was interested in looking at, okay, so in blue is the reality. So what was done in practice at the power plant. In red is the optimization solution from the efficiency points method. And in green is the prediction model. So if we're using the LSTM to predict water discharge for the next 96 hours, so if you look at this very quickly, we can see that, okay, well, here is reality, optimization, prediction, not quite far. I mean, it's not giving something completely different than what is done in practice and what is done with the optimization model also. So this was interesting to see, just as very preliminary results. But then only with these preliminary results, well, okay, we see that water discharges and volumes are not too far from reality, but final volumes are almost nearly impossible to enforce with the LSTM because it's predicting in the future. But when we're doing optimization, we have to value the remaining water in the reservoir at the end of the horizon, so we don't empty the whole reservoir because we're maximizing the energy production. So we have to give value to this water remaining in the reservoir. So how can you enforce the final volumes? This is a question that we still haven't answered. So it's problematic for it's difficult already for the deterministic version to give a final value to the prediction. So with a stochastic version, it will also add the difficulty. Number of turbines in operation requires a post-processing of the results. So this isn't something very difficult to do, but it adds to the calculation. Training the model. So, and I have very preliminary results here, but we had a training set of 84,000 hourly instances, which took around 20 hours to calculate on a cluster. And for the validation, we had around 21,000 instances. So this is also preliminary results based on a really straightforward prediction. I was just interested in looking at, we have all this data. If we try to predict something, is it close or not to what we're usually obtaining as results? So interesting project. There will be a next phase with better prediction models, of course, and a simple prediction, straightforward prediction. And okay. So today, so I went I talked about different formulations in short-term hydropower optimization. So it's a rich field. There's many things going on, and there's still a need to improve the models because we always want to do the most we can out of the available water in the reservoirs. So I presented two formulations. So using combination of turbines, efficiency points. So these were mostly in a regulated market setting. And the deregulated market setting and a bit of a starting work with prediction. So this is what I had for today. So thank you to everyone, and don't hesitate if you have questions.